The first thing I want you to picture is handcuffs, not the kind you see on television, gleaming, dramatic, almost fashionable in the way props become fashionable. The real kind, dull gray metal, slightly cold, that bites just a little when they click into place, and an officer's hand steady on your elbow as if he expected you to run. As if, at 63 years old, in the forest green dress from your working days, having just attended a preliminary hearing you believed would clear your name before lunchtime, you were the danger in this situation. It was a Tuesday morning in October. Detroit in October is something. The light turns that specific shade of amber that makes everything look like a painting you once loved. And the courthouse steps were covered in fallen leaves, red and rust, and the stubborn gold that only autumn makes. People passed on the sidewalk below. Some of them looked. A woman I recognized from my building pressed both hands over her mouth when she saw me. I kept my chin up. I had not done anything. And I needed the watching world to see me standing still in my not doing anything, even with my wrists fastened behind my back and my heart hammering so loud in my chest that I was certain the officer standing beside me could hear it. Somewhere in this city, in a warm kitchen perhaps, with the news playing low and a cup of coffee going cold on the counter, my sister was waiting to see if my name would appear on a screen. And not one of the 31 years I had given her passed through her mind while she waited. That is where this story ends, before it begins. I need you to stay with that image for just a moment. A 63-year-old woman in a forest green dress, standing very still in handcuffs, with Detroit's October light falling sideways across her shoulders and the leaves spinning down around her feet. Stay with it, because that moment is the reason I am here. That moment is the reason none of this can stay inside me any longer. If someone you love is walking through something that sounds anything like this, please share this video with them right now, because sometimes the most important thing is knowing that someone finally saw the truth. Now let me take you back to where this really started. It is early September, the last slow exhale of summer before Detroit tips fully into fall, and the light begins leaving earlier each day. I am standing at my windowsill on the 4th floor of a subsidized housing building in a neighborhood where old brick buildings press up against new glass condos with rooftop terraces and $19 sandwiches, where the morning light hits both the new construction and the old walls at the same angle and makes no distinction between them. My building is the kind of place where you can hear someone's television through the wall and feel a private, quiet gratitude that you are not entirely alone in the world. I have lived here 11 years. I have made it mine. I am wearing my forest green dress, the one I keep for mornings when I need to remind myself who I was before life began asking more of me than it had any right to. There is a small ivory button at the collar that I always leave undone, a habit I have never explained to anyone and never felt obligated to. I put this dress on when I need to feel like a woman with somewhere important to be, even on mornings when I am not going anywhere. There are mornings when that particular distinction is the only thing holding the day in shape. The black-eyed peas have been cooking with a ham hock since 5:30, and their smell moves through the apartment the way good cooking always does, slow, warm, proprietary, like it owns every corner it reaches. From my shelf radio on the kitchen counter, gospel music plays low. It always does when I'm alone. After my husband died 14 years ago, the silence in the mornings became a physical thing, something with mass and edges and a particular way of pressing. The music moved into the space he left. Now it is simply the sound of how my day begins. I water my plants one at a time with the ceramic pitcher my mother left me. The spider plant, the peace lily that needs repotting, the small aloe I have kept alive for 7 years, which I consider a quiet personal victory. Then I reach down to straighten the ring on my left hand the way I have done 10,000 mornings without thinking. My wedding ring is worn so thin now that you can barely read the inscription inside the band. The same words they have always been. The date, our initials, the word forever. But you have to hold it up to the morning light and lean in close to make them out. I kept it on after he died because I could not find a good reason to take it off. because taking it off felt like one more loss I had not consented to. I did not know yet, on that September morning, with the light coming golden through my window, and my beans warm on the stove, and my gospel playing low, and everything feeling, for the moment, like a life I was managing, that my name had already been written on documents I had never seen, accounts I had never opened, and a car I had never once sat inside. The low, unnameable feeling I had been carrying beneath my sternum for weeks, the one I kept calling loneliness and putting away, was trying to tell me. I just had not yet learned what it was saying. My sister is 5 years younger than me, and she is the kind of woman who enters a room and immediately requires something from it. A laugh, a favor, a loan she will frame as a temporary thing with such genuine conviction that you feel almost unkind for considering the possibility that it might not be returned. She has always been this way, even as a child, the one who needed more, got more, and somehow, despite getting more, always needed more still. And for most of my adult life, I told myself that this was simply how she was made, and that love means meeting people as they are made, and that family is what God gives you that you cannot give back. I believed that. I want to be clear that I genuinely, fully believed it. Not as a performance, not as the story I told other people, but as the organizing fact of how I moved through my days. She was my baby sister. She had called me crying in the night more times than I can count, and every single time I had answered. I had built my life around the assumption that she needed me, and that her needing me was the same thing as her loving me, and that if I ever withdrew, the need would become a crisis, and the crisis would be my fault. That is a belief, not a fact. I understand the difference now. I did not then. The early signs were things I smoothed over so automatically, I did not realize I was smoothing them. A phone call from a bank I had never held an account with, asking about a recent transaction. She said it must be some kind of error, and I believed her. A piece of mail addressed to me at her apartment address, which she explained was left over from the one time years ago when I had briefly used her address during a move. A notification about a car insurance policy that arrived in my email for a vehicle I did not own. She said it was likely spam. One of those phishing things. Had I been clicking unknown links? And I said no, and she said she would look into it, and I did not press further. Here is the thing about being gaslit by someone who has known you your whole life. They do not need elaborate stories. They know exactly which explanation fits the shape of your trust. They know which detail you are most likely to accept because they have been studying your acceptance for decades. My sister knew I was not suspicious by nature. She had helped make me that way, one small normalized dismissal at a time, across 31 years of careful cultivation. That afternoon she called while I was halfway through my soap operas. I watched them every day without apology from 2 to 3. That hour I had marked as mine in a day that was otherwise organized entirely around everyone else's needs. When her name appeared on the phone, I turned the television volume down. I always did. I had told myself 100 times I would finish the episode first and call her back. I never did. I picked up every time. You know what I am talking about, don't you? That person in your life whose call you always answer, even when everything in you is asking you why. Even when you already know it will cost you something before you even say hello. She said she was praying for me. She always said she was praying for me when she needed something, which told me more about her relationship with prayer than it did about her relationship with me. That afternoon she needed me to confirm information for a housing application. Could she list me as a financial reference? Was I still her emergency contact? I said yes. I said yes because I always said yes. Because I had convinced myself that she needed me, and that needing me was the same as loving me, and that if I ever said no, she would fall apart and it would be my fault. What I had given up to maintain that certainty is a list too long to recite. $4,700 in loans I never saw again, which I had stopped calling loans and started calling just money that was gone. Holiday dinners with cousins I genuinely loved, who I had stopped attending because she said they didn't really want her there, and I didn't feel right going without her. The distance between me and those cousins grew slowly. Then suddenly, the way all distances do when you stop tending them. I gave up my right to have plans she wasn't part of. I gave up weekends. I gave up saying what I actually thought when what I thought might upset her. I gave up so many of my boundaries so gradually that by the time I tried to find where they had been, there was nothing left to mark the spot. You understand what I am describing, don't you? That particular architecture of love that is really infrastructure. The person who has made themselves indispensable not through what they give you, but through what they have quietly convinced you cannot afford to lose. I turned the television back up when we hung up. The soap opera was in its last 10 minutes. I never did find out what happened in those first 40 minutes I had missed. She called again that night, bright, cheerful, telling me about a new job she had just been offered, a fresh start, how everything was going to be different this time. And I believed her, because believing her was less exhausting than the alternative. Because the alternative meant looking at 31 years of love and asking whether any of it had been real. The beans were perfect that night, thick and warm and honest. They were the best part of that whole day. Standing over the stove, running my thumb over that thin wedding ring, I thought, I have been patient long enough for something to change. I had no idea how soon it was going to come for me or what shape it would take when it arrived. I stopped crying somewhere around the 3rd week of September, not in a dramatic way. I did not decide to stop, did not stand in front of a mirror and make any declarations. I simply woke up one morning and instead of the sadness sitting heavy on my chest, there was something else there. Cooler, drier. Something that wanted answers more than it wanted consolation and had gotten tired of waiting for someone else to provide them. The insurance letter had come again. This time, not an email. A paper letter, official, on company letterhead, billing a real policy number attached to a 2019 Nissan Altima. My name at the top, my date of birth in the policy details, my address. I stood under the flickering fluorescent light in my building's 4th-floor hallway, and I read that letter 4 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket, and I went back into my apartment, and I sat down at the kitchen table. I did not call my sister. That was the first time in 31 years that I had a question about something in my life, and I did not reach for the phone to call her with it. The not calling felt strange, like using the wrong hand. But underneath the strangeness, something else, the particular quiet relief of a decision that has been overdue. I called the insurance company instead. What they read back to me, my name, my social security number used to open the account, my signature on the original policy application, made the air in my lungs go very still. And then I started looking. I want to tell you what that process feels like, because it is a specific kind of feeling that does not get described honestly enough. Going through documents looking for proof that someone you love has been using you as a piece of paper does not feel like rage, not at first. It feels like being very cold in a warm room. Like your hands are moving methodically, cross-referencing, sorting, making notes, while the rest of you is somewhere far back, watching from a distance, unable to fully accept that the distance is real. I requested my credit report. 3 accounts in my name I had not opened. I found rental applications for 2 Detroit apartments, both signed in something that looked like my handwriting until you knew what to look for. The loop on my capital D has a specific quality, a particular break before the curve closes. I know my own handwriting. I have been writing my name for 63 years. These signatures were close. They were not mine. My attorney pulled the insurance policy, the vehicle registration, and the ID application. My ID, the one I had let her borrow for a library card years earlier and forgotten to retrieve. That one act of careless trust. She had kept it. She had used it 14 times across 9 separate documents, with a careful patience that I now understood had been building quietly alongside every phone call I had answered, every loan I had extended, every boundary I had dissolved. And then came the phone records. A text message from her phone to a friend's sent at 7:48 in the morning on September 14th, 7 hours before a 2019 Nissan Altima struck a pedestrian outside a parking garage in Midtown Detroit and fled the scene. She won't even know it was me. She never does. 12 words. Casual. The tone of someone who has run this particular calculation so many times it no longer requires any real effort. She never does. I read those 12 words 4 times. Then I read them once more. And I understood that the whole architecture of what she had built, the borrowed ID, the forged signatures, the fake contracts, the stolen worth of my name, had been constructed on one single certainty, that I would not look. That my love for her was large enough and blind enough to serve as permanent shelter. That the same willingness to forgive that she had spent 30 years carefully cultivating in me would protect her indefinitely. She had not hidden her tracks because she did not need to. She had me. I ended up on the bathroom floor. I do not remember walking there. But I was sitting on the cold tile at 2 a.m, with the thin stripe of fluorescent light under the door from the hallway outside, and the gospel music still playing from the other room the way it always did, and the beans cold on the stove. I pressed my wedding ring flat against the tile, the ring worn so thin you can barely read what it says. The ring that had been on my left hand for 31 years, through everything. I pressed it until the ghost of the inscription touched my palm. I cried once. Hard and fully, the way you cry when you are not performing grief, but actually inside it, when there is no audience and no performance, and nothing left to protect. Then I stopped. I pressed my hand flat on the cold tile. I got up off that floor, and I said, out loud, to the empty room, to my husband maybe, to whoever was listening on the other side of the gospel music, I am going to need to be very smart now. Her name was Bernice, and I am going to tell you right now that I almost did not sit down next to her. I was in the county services waiting room on a Monday morning with a shoebox in my lap. Not a proper file yet, not organized the way it would become, just everything I had collected laid flat and stacked with the insurance letter on top. I had a face that was doing the quiet, exhausting work of holding itself together in public. You know that face. The one you construct when you have made a private decision not to cry in front of strangers, and so every muscle works twice as hard to maintain what passes for composure. I had been wearing that face for approximately 11 days. She was sitting across from me, a woman wearing a county legal aid volunteer badge clipped to the front of her cardigan, reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, her own folder on her lap. She was perhaps 70, perhaps a little more, with the particular quality of attention that certain women have, women who have survived enough to stop performing patience and simply possess it. She looked at my shoebox, not in a rude way, the way a person looks at something when they have learned to read weight, when they understand that what people carry says more than what they say out loud. She said, "What do you have in there?" I told her. Not everything immediately, but I told her about the letter and the policy and the ID and the signatures. I told her in the measured voice I had been practicing, the one that kept everything in its proper container so that nothing spilled. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. She looked at me very directly, the way people rarely do anymore, and she said, "You didn't do any of this, and you are holding your own proof." I want to tell you something about those 12 words, because they hit me in a way that surprised me completely. I had read the documents myself. I knew, logically, factually, without any doubt, that I had not done these things. But there is a difference between knowing a truth and hearing it spoken back to you plainly by another human being, with no hedging, no careful qualification, no playing of both sides. When Bernice said it, it entered differently. It landed in a part of me that had been unoccupied for a long time, a part that had been waiting for someone from outside to confirm that I was not imagining the shape of my own life. She stayed 2 hours past the end of her volunteer shift. A stranger. A woman who owed me nothing and had come to serve the general public on a Monday morning, who had no particular reason to become invested in the specific shape of my situation. She helped me sort the shoebox into something organized. She told me to request the enhanced surveillance image from the parking garage. She told me to contact the district attorney's office directly, to document every date against every piece of evidence, to build a timeline that stood on its own logic. She walked me through each step with the authority of someone who had watched this kind of thing before, who had sat across from other women carrying other shoeboxes in other plastic chairs, and had learned, through repetition, what to say and what to ask. Before I left, she handed me a legal aid card. She had written her direct number on the back in neat, even handwriting. She looked at me steadily and said, "The hardest part is going to be not feeling responsible for what she did. That feeling is going to come. Don't let it stay." She was right. That feeling came. It arrived in waves in the days that followed, with a particular texture of shame. Not because I believed I had done anything wrong, but because I had loved someone so completely and been used so thoroughly. And there is a specific kind of humiliation in understanding that your love was treated as someone else's business model, that the income of her security was paid for by the erosion of mine. I drove home along the street that runs parallel to the river, where the new glass condos gleam on one side and the old brick structures stand patient and weathered on the other. And for the first time since September 14th, I did not feel the cold weight in my chest. What I felt instead was focused, not the hot, scattered anger that breaks you into pieces, but the kind that gathers you, the kind that pulls every part of you toward the same point and holds it there. I had a shoebox full of proof. I had a stranger's phone number on a card. And I had 31 years of patience that had just found a better purpose. I went home. I turned the gospel up slightly louder than usual. And I sat down at the kitchen table and I made a list. The most dangerous thing about having a plan is how ordinary it makes you look. I smiled when she called. I asked about the new job, the fresh start, the better income, the first real opportunity she had described with such brightness that I had almost allowed myself to be happy for her. And I listened with what she would have read as warmth, because she had spent 31 years interpreting my warmth as unconditional and had never once tried to look beneath it. That was her first and most permanent miscalculation. She had confused my patience with my permission. I did not tell her what I had found. I did not mention Bernice. I did not describe the shoebox under my bed, which had by then graduated to a proper accordion file, organized by category and cross-referenced by date, growing with the precision of someone who has finally found a worthy use for her attention. In the evenings, after my soap operas finished, I watched them all the way through now, every single minute, because I had decided that was the shape of what reclaiming a small thing looked like. I would spread the documents across the kitchen table and work. I cross-referenced signatures against authenticated samples of my handwriting. I matched dates across the 9 forged documents against her phone records and her documented location at the time each was signed. I built a timeline so precise that any gap became an answer and any overlap became evidence. The dollars she had borrowed and never returned, the fortune she had extracted from the slow borrowing of my name across decades, I tracked it all. What had appeared to be separate incidents across different years revealed itself, in aggregate, to be something systematic, not impulsive, designed. And while I worked, I sat with something harder than documents. I sat with the recognition that she had not just stolen my name. She had stolen my world, quietly, incrementally, the way careful people do their most destructive work, not all at once, but one small ask at a time, one discouraged connection at a time, until I had gradually become a woman whose entire social landscape had been reduced to one person, the one causing the harm. I called one of my cousins. She picked up on the second ring, and when I said her name, she said, "Honey, where have you been?" Not accusatory, warm, the kind of warm that means I never stopped waiting for you to call. We talked for over an hour. I told her enough. And what she said, when she understood the shape of what had been happening, was, "I tried to reach you for years. She would always pick up and say you were tired, or resting, or going through something and didn't want to talk. I thought you were pulling away from all of us." I held the phone very still and I thought, that is the mechanism. Not an explosion, not a dramatic severing. Just a slow, quiet narrowing of a person's world until she cannot quite remember when it got this small. By the time you feel alone, the aloneness has already been constructed around you. One morning I called my sister and let her believe everything was fine. And then I went directly from that call to my building management office and asked about units in a smaller building I had been noticing across town. Trees out front, window boxes, even in November, the kind of block that feels like a neighborhood. The monthly cost was within reach if I stopped paying for two things: a storage unit full of mostly her belongings, and a phone plan add-on she had been listed on for years. I requested the application. I brought it home and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the first line, name of applicant. And then I wrote my name. My full name. My handwriting, with the loop on the capital D exactly as it has always been. The break before the curve closes, which no forgery had ever managed to replicate correctly. I signed every page. Every signature was mine, entire and provable and clean. I slid the completed application inside the back cover of my Bible, between the last page and the cardboard backing, where it rested in what I considered good company, and where my sister, who sometimes called to ask if she could stop by, would never think to look. She called that Friday, cheerful, to tell me her daughter's baby shower was coming up. 30 relatives, a church hall, catered food, the whole afternoon planned with care. She said, "You should come. It would mean the world to her." I said I would think about it. I smiled while I said it, because by then I had learned that smiling is something you can do with your whole face while your mind is occupying an entirely different room. My niece called me herself 3 days later. Not her mother. Her. That distinction matters because I want you to understand that what happened in that church hall was not something I engineered from beginning to end. My niece called because she loved me, because despite everything her mother had done to narrow my world, there were still people at the edges of my family who could reach me if they tried. That phone call told me something important about how much of me had survived. She said, "Auntie, you're the one who always showed up for me. I need you there." I said I would be there. That evening I called my attorney. The formal transfer of charges was in process. The warrant was being prepared. The evidence my attorney had submitted had been received and verified. She told me to remain calm, to allow the legal process its own pace, not to confront my sister privately in a way that could be characterized as intimidation. I told her I was going to a baby shower. There was a pause on the line. She said, "Keep everything calm. Let the documents do the work." The documents were ready. Across 3 weeks of evening work, I had assembled a file with the thoroughness of someone who had been patient her whole life and was finally directing that patience towards something it deserved. The 14 forged signatures beside authenticated comparisons, the 9 documents with dates, locations, and cross-references, the car insurance policy linked to the accident report, the enhanced surveillance still from the parking garage, time-stamped at 7:22 p.m. on September 14th, showing a woman in a dark coat at the wheel of a Nissan Altima registered in my name, the 12-word text message, printed and dated, the district attorney's letter confirming the transfer of charges, and on one separate sheet of paper, in my own careful handwriting, a ledger of every dollar I had given her across 31 years. Not to reclaim it. You cannot reclaim that kind of wealth once it has been given, and I had learned to call it what it was. But because I needed her in front of witnesses to understand that I had been counting the whole time. I printed a second complete copy and gave it to my cousin, who had become what I had not had in years, a reliable witness. Someone standing firmly on my side of the line, watching with clear eyes, ready to confirm that the documents existed and that I had held them in my own hands. On the morning of the shower, I pressed my forest green dress, the same one, the one I had been wearing on the courthouse steps, the one that had been on my back when the handcuffs clicked shut on a beautiful October morning for something I did not do. I pressed it carefully and hung it on the door and stood in front of it for a long moment. I wore my wedding ring, worn so thin you can barely read the inscription. 31 years on my left hand through everything. My cousin drove. As we turned into the church parking lot, I saw it immediately. Parked right at the front, in the space closest to the entrance, the space that announces its own occupant to everyone arriving, a Porsche Cayenne in ocean blue. Beautiful in the way only purchased certainty is beautiful. She had bought it 3 months after the accident, paid in cash, on a salary that should never have supported it. I stared at it from the passenger window, and I thought about what that car represented, the profit of my name, sitting in a church parking lot on a Sunday afternoon, gleaming. My cousin said nothing. She understood. I picked up the folder from the back seat. She put her hand briefly on my arm, 1 second, and then let go. We walked into the church hall together. Pale yellow streamers, round tables with white cloths, silver trays of food along one wall. Gospel music coming from a speaker in the corner. 30 people. The sound of a room gathered in celebration. And across the hall, my sister, back to us at first. Accepting a hug from our aunt's neighbor, receiving the room the way she always received rooms, as if it had been arranged for her. Then she turned, and I watched her face do something I had never, in 63 years, seen it do. She saw me, and her face went blank. Not surprised. I want to be precise about this because the distinction matters. Not frightened, not defensive, not caught, blank. Like every expression she had ever put on for any room switched off simultaneously. And for just one unguarded second, I saw what lived underneath all of it. Not love, not regret, calculation. The rapid, cold assessment of someone determining what I knew and what, if anything, could still be managed. She had spent 31 years managing things. She had no way of knowing, in that second, that this particular thing was not going to yield. I crossed the room at an even pace, not rushing, not performing. The room was beginning to notice, not all at once, but in the way a room notices when something with weight moves through it, the way conversations trail off when they sense a different kind of conversation approaching. My niece was at the food table, 8 months along, laughing at something a relative had said, and she saw me and her whole face opened. She started moving toward me. I stopped in front of my sister. I set the folder on the table between us. And I said, in a voice that surprised me with how steady it was, "You counted on me never knowing. I always knew more than you thought." The room did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way rooms actually do, in a ripple. One conversation pausing, that pause spreading to the next table and the next, until the gospel music from the speaker in the corner was the only sound filling the hall. My sister's hand moved toward the folder. I placed my hand flat on top of it. She said, "This is not the place." And I said, "You picked every place for 31 years. This is the last time I let you pick mine." She tried to lower her voice, lean in, make it something intimate and contained, the way she always had when she needed me to quiet down, calm down, not make a scene, not here, not in front of people. That particular maneuver had worked every single time for 3 decades, not today. I said, "Inside this folder is a warrant for your arrest. Identity theft, insurance fraud, and felony hit and run. Everything is documented. 14 forged signatures with authenticated comparisons. Every account you opened in my name. The text you sent the morning of the accident. The parking garage footage. 9 documents. The district attorney's letter." The silence in the room had the quality of people who have stopped pretending not to hear something and are now simply, openly listening. I said, "I stood in handcuffs on a courthouse step in October in a dress I had kept since my working days, in front of people I had known for years. For something you did. I spent weeks of my life proving that my name was my own. And the whole time you called me on the phone and told me you were praying for me." Something left her face at that. The last trace of calculation simply went. What replaced it was not remorse. I want to be honest about that, because people expect remorse, and I did not see it. What I saw was the specific expression of a person who has just understood that the structure they built is not standing anymore. She said, I didn't mean for the accident to go the way. I said, "Stop." One syllable. She stopped. For the first time in 31 years, my sister stopped. I'm going to tell you what I believe about the moment when justice finally comes, because I have thought about it a great deal since that afternoon. I always imagined it would feel large, triumphant, the way you picture victory before you have ever held it in your hands. What it actually felt like was clean, quiet, like a window being opened in a room that has been sealed for too long. I looked at the room and I said, 30 people in this room. Pick one who still believes you. She did not pick anyone. She stood very still, and she did not pick a single person. And then my niece, 8 months pregnant, one hand resting on her belly, walked across that room and stood beside me. She did not say a word. She positioned her body next to mine, and she faced her mother, and the language of that was something my sister had always understood perfectly. Then one of our aunts rose from her seat. Then my cousin, from near the door, moved toward us. Steadily, the way people move when they have been waiting a long time for the chance to choose clearly and are finally being given it. My sister looked at them. She looked at me. I picked up the folder. I left a copy on the table. I said nothing else because nothing left needed to be said. I walked to my niece and I put my arms around her. She was warm and real and very alive, and she held on very tight. Outside, through the windows, the October leaves were still coming down. Some things take exactly as long as they take, and then they are done. There is a particular quality to the weeks that follow something like that. Everything appears still on the surface while, underneath, everything is in motion. She was formally charged on a Thursday, 18 days after the baby shower. Identity theft, insurance fraud, felony hit and run. The bail was set higher than mine had been, which I noted without any particular satisfaction. I want to be honest about what I felt when I heard, not triumph, not the large, clean vindication I had imagined during the worst months. What I felt was more like the lifting of something I had been carrying so long I had stopped registering it as weight, an absence where a heaviness had been, room in my chest that I had not had before. She lost the apartment within the month. The job she had called to tell me about with such excitement, the new position, the fresh income, the beginning of a real change, she lost it in the first week after the charges became public record. The Porsche Cayenne in ocean blue was repossessed before Christmas. I did not seek these pieces of information out. They arrived the way news arrives in a city where people know each other, in the particular economy of a community where nothing stays hidden for long. Our family moved the way family moves when something undeniable is placed directly in front of them and the pretending stops being possible. Our aunts called me. My cousin came over and sat with me on a Sunday afternoon, and we drank coffee and talked about our mothers and the old neighborhood and small ordinary things. In that ordinariness was something I had not had in years, company that wanted nothing from me. Just the simple presence of someone who had chosen my side of the line and stayed there. My niece called every week. She had her baby in December, a girl, small and entirely unconcerned with the complexity of the family she had arrived into. I visited them in January, and when my niece put her daughter in my arms, I held her for a long time without saying anything. Some things do not require language. Some things are only understood through weight and warmth and the sound of another person breathing. I made small changes in my apartment, and I want to tell you about them because they were not small at all. I turned the gospel music up, not in a single dramatic gesture. I simply reached over one morning and turned the dial a little further than I had ever allowed myself to turn it, and the music filled the room the way it had always been capable of filling it. And I thought, why did I keep this at a whisper in my own home? The answer was that I had spent so many years managing my presence, keeping myself undemanding, easy to have around, unlikely to require anything, that I had practiced smallness until it felt like my natural size. It is not my natural size. I watch my soap operas all the way through now. The entire episode, from the opening title to the final credits, without turning anything down for anyone. This is not a grand thing. It is a very ordinary thing. And its ordinariness is precisely what makes it feel like freedom. I moved my wedding ring to my right hand, the ring worn so thin you can barely read the inscription. I wore it on my right hand instead. Not because I stopped loving what it represents, because there is a difference between honoring something and being held by it. The inscription still says what it has always said. It says forever. And I am choosing to believe that forever is large enough to include the life I am building now on my own terms from the foundation up. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, I signed a lease. Bernice came with me. She had become, across those months, something I had not anticipated, a genuine friend, the kind built on nothing except truth, which turns out to be the only kind with any real durability. She stood beside me in the small leasing office while I laid the application flat on the desk and picked up the pen. I wrote my name, my full name, my handwriting, my loop on the capital D exactly as it has always been, on every line that required a signature, every page entirely mine. When I finished, Bernice said, "How does that feel?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "Like the first time I have written my own name in years." She laughed. I laughed. In that leasing office in Detroit on a March afternoon, with the last of winter's light coming through the window, I laughed with the kind of ease that means something has healed. I do not have the country house yet, the one with land and space to breathe, the garden wider than a windowsill, enough silence in every direction to hear myself think. But I know which way I am facing, and I know how to move. One day I will drive into town along a road I chose, in a Porsche Cayenne in ocean blue, because I am 63 years old and I have lived long enough to understand that every beautiful thing I was ever told I did not deserve was always, always, already mine. The first step was signing my own name. Everything else follows from that. It is late spring now. Detroit in late spring is a city coming back to itself. The trees along the boulevard have gone fully green. The early mornings smell like something fresh and recently arrived, and the light through my new window in my new apartment with its trees and window boxes comes in at an angle I have never had before. It falls across my plants on the sill, the spider plant, the peace lily finally repotted and standing straight, the small aloe all 7 years intact. And I sit with my coffee, and I think about September. That September morning in the forest green dress, with the ceramic pitcher in my hand and the gospel playing low, and the black-eyed peas on, and the low, unnameable feeling in my chest that I kept calling loneliness and could not name as knowing. The distance between that woman and this one is not as great as it might appear. She had everything she needed. She simply had not yet given herself permission to use it. I want to talk about what actually happened. Not the arrest, not the legal outcome. You know those parts. I want to talk about the mechanism underneath the mechanism, the design that made everything else possible. Because I have lived with it long enough to recognize its shape, and I need you to be able to recognize it too. What my sister used against me first, and most reliably, was not the forged documents. Those were instruments. What she used first was isolation. The technical name for it is a tactic. In practice, it feels like love. It sounds like she just doesn't understand you the way I do. Those cousins never really appreciated what you bring to this family. You have me. Why do you need all those other people pulling at you in different directions? You lose one connection at a time. One holiday dinner, one old friendship, one cousin you used to call on Sunday mornings. It happens gradually enough that you do not notice the walls going up. You only notice, one day, that you are somehow inside them, and the person who built them is the only one who has a key. By the time you feel alone, the aloneness has already been constructed around you. That is the design. The isolation is not a side effect of the manipulation. It is the foundation of it. Once there is no one else close enough to reflect your reality back to you, your reality becomes whatever the person inside the walls decides to tell you it is. I believed things about my own perception and judgment that were not true, because the only person consistently confirming or denying my experience was the one who needed my experience to remain confused. That is how it works. That is how someone takes something from you without ever technically stealing. By the time you discover the theft, you have already lost the witnesses who could have seen it happening. I want to be clear about something, because it matters more than I can fully say. What happened to me has a legal name and a legal framework and laws specifically designed to protect people in exactly my situation. The Elder Justice Act of 2010 was the first comprehensive federal law on elder abuse in the history of this country. The first time Congress looked at what was happening to people of a certain age and said plainly, "This is a category of harm and it requires a category of response." That law exists because what happened to me has happened to women and men across this country, in cities and small towns, in subsidized housing, and in large homes, by strangers and by family members, always with the same mechanism at its center: the systematic exploitation of love, trust, and the particular vulnerability that comes with age and with needing people. And today, all 50 American states have laws protecting vulnerable adults from exactly this kind of exploitation. Every single state. 50 separate legal protections that I did not know existed when I was sitting on the bathroom floor of my housing unit at 2 a.m, pressing my wedding ring against the cold tile. I did not know them when I was standing in handcuffs on a courthouse step. But a stranger in a county waiting room handed me a card and told me I was already holding my proof, and that changed everything. Those laws protected me. They can protect you, or someone you know, or someone who has not yet found their Bernice and does not yet know they are allowed to look. If something in this story sounded familiar, if you recognize the mechanism, the slow narrowing, the way love can be used as a tool against the very person doing the loving, please find someone to tell. A legal aid office, a social worker, a cousin you have been meaning to call. You do not need a shoebox full of proof to start asking questions. You just need to start. Now I want to know something from you. Where are you listening from today? Because I know this story traveled, and I would genuinely love to know where it landed. If you are in Detroit, if you know these streets, this light, the way this city looks in October with the leaves coming down across the courthouse steps and the river reflecting the last of the afternoon, let me know in the comments. And if you are somewhere else entirely, tell me that too. Tell me where you are and tell me what you would have done. At what point in this story would you have picked up the folder? At what point would you have walked out? What you recognized in it, what you are still sitting with. If this story reached you, if any part of it sounded like the truth of something you already knew or something you needed to hear, please like it. It tells me that this work matters. It helps someone else who might need this story more than they know how to ask for find their way to it. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, please subscribe. There are more women like me. There are more truths that spent too long sitting quiet in subsidized apartments with the gospel playing low, and that deserve to be told out loud, in full, in front of everyone. I am 63 years old. I am watering my plants in the morning light of a spring that got here eventually. The way spring always does. The gospel is up, my name is on the lease, and it is mine.